Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Shanaz Brochek and Ashley Nelson, who are joining us today from Michigan to share tools for managing difficult emotions with mindful self compassion. They bring a deep background in mindfulness, well being, and coaching training, and we're delighted to have them. I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Shanaz and Ashley and enjoy this experience along with all of you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Lynn. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Nelson, and I'm here with my partner and collaborator, Shanaz Brochak, and we are just honored to be with all of you today and really appreciative that you've taken the time to commit to unplugging and learning more about the power of mindful self-compassion. It is a very really powerful way, not to use that word twice, a powerful way to manage and navigate stress and uncertainty and connect with a lot more joy and contentment inside. So I know Shanaz is going to take us through today a number of practices that have been tried and true for the two of us and that we feel very strongly about sharing with all of you. Shanaz?
Great. Thanks, Ashley, and welcome everyone. It's great to have you here with us today. This topic of mindful self compassion has been really important for me in my own life. I feel like um, I've been on a long journey of trying to be a happier person, be less stressed, be less anxious. Um, Sometimes I've dealt with depression in life, and so the tools that mindful self compassion offer really help to address all of those things. And I've been a long time mindfulness practitioner, but it was back just before the pandemic. I think it was in November of 2019 that I had an opportunity to go to a 2 day event, that a mindful self compassion 2 day event that Chris Germer and Kristen Neff led. And so they've done, if any of you are familiar at all with this topic, they've done a lot of really amazing research and program design and written a number of books on these topics related to mindful self-compassion. And Kristen Neff is at UT Austin, and Chris Germer is at Harvard Medical School. And so when I attended that program, I had no idea that we were just around the corner from a time that I was going to need this skill set even more, these practices even more. But then the pandemic happened, and so one of the great gifts of that opportunity for me was that because I was working from home, I had a lot of flexibility to try to fit in extra training. So I went on to do several months of training in the program and ultimately decided to do teacher training. Ashley and I went through a lot of this programming together, and so I look forward to being able to share some of these practices with you today and just encourage your own exploration as you get familiar with the topic a little bit more. And so I want to invite you to just, whatever you're doing right now, to just be fully present with us and give this time to yourself. We so rarely do that, right? We often just feel like, well, we need to be available to our children and that text message that's coming in, or our next email, or whatever is pinging us in the background. But this time is for you. This time is intended to be healing and generative for you, and so we invite you to that space together with us. And I'd like to just ask you to quickly check in with yourself to just see how you're arriving today. What are the emotions that are present for you in this moment? And if you could just drop them into the chat, we'd love to just see what's alive here right now. Here's some of the emotions that are present. Just one or two things that you're noticing for yourself.
I know I arrive with a sense of calm, but also eager to practice some of these. Laura arrives with some fear, and Michelle arrives with frustration.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, fear, frustration, stress,
Stress. Mhm.
calmness, and eagerness. And we've got some of all of these things going on, a lot of stress, anxiety, so much else to be doing. Yeah. Absolutely. It feels like the to-do list never ends, right? It's almost intimidating sometimes to write one because it just keeps going, right? That can be very overwhelming. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. And so as we move through the day, it will be good to check in with yourself and see how do things change for you, or what do you notice in in these practices that we go through together. What starts to shift and change if things start to shift and change. But what you just did, labeling your emotions itself is a mindfulness practice, right? To just be aware, to check in with yourself and notice without judging yourself about what's coming up, but just noticing, oh, okay, that's what's actually going on with me right now. And from that place, we can think a little bit more about what we actually need, which is really the central question of mindful self-compassion. What is it that I need? What is it that would be helpful for me in this moment? And so in order to know what we need, we have to first identify where are we, right? So I'd like to just take a couple minutes with all of you to settle in and just do a soft landing practice with you. And so if you'd like, you're welcome to just close your eyes or soften your gaze, whatever feels right for you. Just settling into the present moment and into your body. And we're going to include this component of compassion today. So just taking in a few deep breaths. And as you exhale, maybe just letting loose with an ah. If you're feeling that stress, just letting it go. Ah. Shrugging it off. Just letting yourself each time relax a little bit more deeply. And then turning your attention inward, just seeing if you can notice any tension that's going on in your body. Maybe you're holding it in your shoulders, or your chest, your belly. Just seeing what you're noticing right now for yourself. And if you find any discomfort, just to yourself silently, maybe just acknowledging with a little ah, like you would to comfort a child, just turning your attention softly to yourself. All right. So we've actually started, even in that short little guided practice, to introduce you a little bit to the components of mindful self-compassion. The first part, you were just focusing on your breath, right? Noticing any tension in your body, and that's really mindfulness, noticing what's going on with you. And self-kindness, that part where I was saying, just say ah to yourself, right? Or acknowledging that you're feeling something that feels uncomfortable. That is self-kindness. And maybe in just doing this together in our small group here, you may even feel a little common humanity. Thinking about what was in the chat, there were several of you that were commenting about some difficult emotions that are going on right now. Stress, overwhelm, all of those kinds of feelings, right? You're not alone in that experience. It's part of what it means to be human. We don't know, not all of our emotions are easy. Some of them are really tough. Sometimes in our lives are particularly challenging. And so I think the good news is that self-compassion is a practice that can be learned by anyone. And in some ways, it's much easier than you might think. It doesn't necessarily take a lot of time. And there are some practices we'll go through today that you'll immediately be able to use. You'll have context for them. I want to give you a lived experience of them in our space together. And you'll be able to walk out of the door or out of your office, your home office, and start to pay attention to what's going on with you and to be able to call on these practices. You will probably hear me call mindful self-compassion, you'll hear me call it MSC. It's sort of the short script that we often refer to. So if you hear me say MSC, I'm talking about mindful self-compassion today. And so, how do we actually know when we need mindful self-compassion? Well, it's when we're having, oops, I think I clicked too far. There we go. How do we know that we need mindful self-compassion? It's when we are experiencing difficult emotions, right? For some reason, that slide just does not want to pop up. And so let's start by thinking about, before I get into explaining backdraft, wondering what are some difficult emotions that are coming up for you? What are some difficult emotions that are familiar to you? Maybe just putting those in the chat. We already identified a couple of them, but I'm curious about what's on your radar. I see Lynn putting in overwhelm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Feeling a lack of control, too much to do, not enough time, right? All the stress, judgment. Yeah, judgment of ourselves, of others, our circumstances.
Too much to do to do it well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a little perfectionism, maybe. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Scared of getting older. Yes. Fear.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
fear. Absolutely. Yeah, all of these things going on for us right now, right? And in the background, it can be complex. We can have so many emotions happening at the same time, and it can be anger, it can be disappointment, fear, resentment. All of those kinds of things are difficult emotions,
Laura
right?
has just added another great one, Shanaz,
Yeah,
isolation, isolated.
isolated. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that sense of loneliness that we
Mm-hmm.
experience.
And resentment. Martha's chimed in with resentment, sometimes maybe towards colleagues. Do your own work.
Right, right.
No?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And so mindful self-compassion is intended to help offer additional resources to deal with those difficult emotions when they come up. And some of them are things that are happening right now. And sometimes maybe this is a feeling you've had as well, that sometimes when we're dealing with something in the present moment, there's something from the past that is also layering on the level of pain that we experience, right? It might be some past relationship, it might be relationship history with the person that we're having conflict with, or something completely separate, but that just reminds us of that difficult feeling and those types of emotions. And so we're really trying to meet those challenges from a position of strength with self-compassion. And so as we start to move through things today, what I want to encourage you to do is just to let go of any unnecessary effort, right? Just to be kind to yourself and attend to your own comfort and well-being, right? So if you want to slouch in your chair, if you at some point decide that you need to go lay on the floor, grab a pillow, close your eyes, do whatever it is that makes you feel better right now. The only expectation I have of you is for you to take care of yourselves. And so again, that core question just being, what is it that I need to be able to answer that for yourself? And so I want to share this concept of backdraft, which is something that often comes up for us when we're flooded with difficult emotions. And that can happen in the process of trying to be more self-compassionate. So you would think, oh, well, I'm trying to be self-compassionate, so I should just feel fine. It shouldn't be that hard, right? But sometimes we'll have this pain that will come in as we try to give ourselves self-compassion. And you might be familiar with how, when there's a fire that's trapped in a room and then you go to open the door, and hopefully none of you have had to do this, but if you have, it's pretty overwhelming, right? You open the door and there's fire in there, and then the oxygen rushes in, the fire gets bigger, right? And it's kind of like that with self compassion. So when our hearts start to open to self compassion, there might be times that there are old painful memories that rush in, and it can start to feel overwhelming. And we do things in those situations. Sometimes we avoid and we don't want to do mindful self compassion because it's uncomfortable. Ashley and I were talking about that earlier, that sometimes it can lead to avoidance, but it can also just lead to, in the moment, being surprised by pain that comes up for you. One time when I was doing a practice, I thought I was perfectly fine. I came in a really good mood. I thought, oh, this is so helpful. I'm loving mindful self-compassion. And then something about the practice made me think about this moment as a child where four of my fingers got slammed in a car door. And I think I was 8 years old. I was just a little girl, right? But what happened was that instead of my caregiver extending warmth and kindness to me in that moment, I was actually reprimanded. I was scolded for being careless, right? What was my hand doing there? I was inconveniencing this other person. And so it shocked me that came up for me, but I just want to be conscious of the fact that could happen for some of you, and to just encourage you, if that happens, to reach out to Ashley on the chat, and feel free to stick around at the end for any individual support that we could offer to you. But what mindful self-compassion can do for us is that it can give us the tools to go back to that 8-year-old little girl and reparent ourselves, give ourselves what we actually need, not about the fingers on the door, but just where we are now can be a way to offer ourselves the kindness and compassion that we actually need in our lives, from a place of understanding ourselves and really treating ourselves with respect and kindness. And so this has been just such an empowering process for me to learn. I hope that it will be that for you as well. And so, oh, there it is. It's in the other order somehow. There we go. Now I'm back where I thought it was. And so it can help us to connect to self-compassion sometimes by considering how we would treat a friend, right? It's often easy to think warmly and compassionately with kindness towards our friends, more easily than it can be to do with ourselves. And so we're going to do a short journaling exercise, and I want to just invite you to take out a pen and paper. I'll give you a moment as you're bringing that to yourself. And so I want you to think of a time where maybe you had a close friend who in some way was suffering. There was something going on that was difficult. And here you're not choosing a partner or a family member, because sometimes they're too close when you're learning self-compassion, but just a friend you really care about who was struggling. Maybe they had some sort of difficulty in their life, a relationships challenge, a work challenge, or maybe they were just feeling insecure in some way. So how would you typically respond to a friend in a situation like that? What would you say? Think about what kind of tone you might use with them. Even how you might hold your body. Would you lean in? Would you embrace them? What would you do? What nonverbal kinds of gestures would be helpful? Just taking a moment to write down whatever is coming up for you. for this next part, you might want to just close your eyes for a moment or soften your gaze and look downward. I want you to bring to mind a time that you were suffering in some way. Maybe there was some kind of difficulty you faced, or some time where you felt inadequate or judged yourself. Just bringing to mind, how do you typically respond to yourself in these situations? What do you say to yourself? What's the tone and the way that you speak to yourself? And even as you think about your own posture or nonverbals that come up, what does that typically look like for you? And just writing down whatever you notice. And maybe just wrapping up the sentence that you're on, coming back together. Curious to hear a little bit about what that was like for you, and what did you notice as you compared how you might treat a friend versus how you might treat yourself. And we're happy to have you unmute or put it in the chat, either way.
I said I respond to friends by asking them how they're feeling. And then I noticed one of the first things that I did for myself was I tried to push down my feelings or escape them by reading or sleeping or doing something else.
Yeah, Michelle, that's so common that we do that, right? We try to ignore what's going on, push it down, keep ourselves busy with something else so that we can be preoccupied and not actually deal with it because it's painful, right? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I can certainly say I've done that before. That sounds pretty familiar to me. Yeah, I mean,
I,
these are the
I
kinds of
found
things.
the tone I found the tone in my thinking very different. For someone else, I acknowledged how they were feeling. I was very caring and thinking of ways I could help or just
Yeah.
be with them. For myself, it was more get over it, annoyed, feeling sorry for myself, and then my reaction is a little combative because I'm in that state. So very different tone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's such a common response, Lynn. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. We tend to be a lot harder on ourselves than we would be on a friend. We can really not talk that nicely to ourselves at times, right? It's like we're slamming the car door on our own fingers. We're just right there complaining about it and not giving ourselves the compassion that we actually need in the moment. Very common that that happens. And so compassion, self-compassion is really about being able to do this for ourselves. So in the journaling exercise, we were thinking about compassion for others and compassion for ourselves. And in a simple way of thinking about compassion is treating ourselves with the same kind of kindness that we would actually treat a friend, right? How do you do that for yourself when things don't go well? How can you actually be a friend to yourself? And it's also treating ourselves as we would like other people, our friends and our family, to actually treat us. So it's being aware of the wishes we have. It's sometimes one of the things that Chris Germer will often say is, what is it you really want to have whispered into your ear? What is it that you wish that somebody would just acknowledge and say to you in the moment? And being aware of that. And then instead of needing it from outside of yourself, being able to call upon it within yourself out of love for yourself. And that was a big shift for me to be able to do that. But it's there. We have that ability in ourselves. And so I want to share a little bit around some of the research about self-compassion. And if you think back to that exercise that we just did, we often are hard on ourselves because of our belief systems, right? We think that somehow, other people are deserving of compassion, but we somehow are not deserving of self-compassion. So, you might think that it's a weakness, right, to show self-compassion to yourself. Maybe you think it's selfish, or that you're shirking responsibility, right? If you're leaning too much into, well, I'm hurt in this situation, and giving yourself too much self-care. And also people can tend to think that if they, if they show themselves self-compassion, that they won't be as motivated somehow, that they'll actually lose motivation, that they won't be able to, to go the distance, and it'll undermine their efforts somehow. But the research on this is pretty amazing and pretty compelling. And there's a growing body of this research, which I find the research compelling, and then I find the lived experience even more compelling. And so the first is that people are better able, when they're self-compassionate, better able to cope with significant challenges. They're more resilient, they're more persistent when they face challenges and adversity. They tend to be more caring and supportive. They're better able to take the perspective of another person in conflict situations, and maybe even apologizing, right? There might be times when, you know, an apology is sort of the kind thing to do, and they're better able to put themselves in another person's shoes. They also engage in healthier behaviors like exercise, eating well, all of these things, taking care of themselves, right? And they tend to experience less anxiety, depression, all of the different forms of stress that we've been talking about today, and shame. And they also report greater happiness. They're actually more satisfied with life. They report being more happy, and are generally more optimistic instead of being pessimistic. And so I just want to encourage you to really take this in, right? This is why we're here, because the research says that this actually works. And you know, and Ashley and I are big personal proponents of doing this work, because we need it ourselves, right? We push ourselves really hard in the work that we do, and have our own life struggles, and so self-compassion really helps to address all of those things, and to live with a little more joy and peace. And what's amazing is then when you're in that space, then you're better able to actually have compassion for other people. So self-compassion is this incredible doorway into being able to actually have compassion for others. Because when you realize what's going on for yourself and all of the layers and complexity, then you can start to say, oh, this person's behaving in a certain way. They're acting stressed out. They're showing a stress response. There must be more to the story. I wonder what I don't know, right? And so, oops, here we go. So it might help to understand a little bit more about the physiology behind all of this and what's actually going on in our bodies when we experience stress or if we're self-critical, and then what's going on when we actually are more self-compassionate. So you're all familiar with the fight, flight, and freeze response, right? This is the way that our threat defense systems have developed in order to protect us when there's something that we believe to be an imminent threat, right? To our physical well-being generally, sort of in the past, but it's not just our physical. It's not just our physical threats that worry us. It's also our emotional things that threaten us in an emotional way. And so our amygdala, which is our reptilian brain at the base of the brain stem, when that gets triggered, we release cortisol and adrenaline in our bodies, and we get ready for that fight, flight, or freeze. But what happens when we take something more personally and something threatens our view of ourselves, then that stress response gets turned inward and it shows up as self-criticism, isolation, and ruminating, right? We feel badly about ourselves, we talk negatively to ourselves, we put these kinds of pressures on ourselves that we just described, and we feel very alone in all of that. And so self-compassion is really the antidote to all of this, right? So when we're going into that fight response or self-criticism, instead it's showing up with self-kindness. And there are two ways that we do that. We do self-kindness by changing the way that we talk to ourselves, flipping the script, right? Being able to talk to ourselves in a more self-compassionate way. And we also can do this through the mammalian response of soothing touch, right? So supportive and soothing touch is another way to actually show kindness to yourself. And we'll go through an exercise of that to help you understand what I'm referring to. And then when we think about common humanity, instead of that isolation where we feel like we're alone in this experience, with self-compassion, we actually just say, oh, this is part of what it means to be fully human, right? Other people experience this too. It's not that I'm inherently flawed. It's that everybody goes through these difficulties, and sort of taking in that view instead of judging yourself, instead of isolating. And then the last part is mindfulness, to really be aware of what's going on in your body in the moment, to notice, and from that place to be able to choose self-compassion, to notice common humanity, to be aware, and to have greater equanimity in those moments where you're able to see what's going on and be the observer of yourself instead of judging yourself for what's happening. And so we're going to try this out. The piece of self-kindness that I was referring to related to soothing and supportive touch. And so this is just another way of extending kindness to ourselves. And it's so simple, but it can really be tremendous in terms of the value that it brings to us. So I want to invite you to stand up for this, and I'm going to stand up too, just so I can show you. I may have to back up a little bit for my camera. Maybe I'll try to squat down a little bit so I can. I'm going to get a little bit of a workout here on my thighs while we and my glutes while I do this with you. But yeah, what I'd like you to do is just understand, first of all, that touch is a signal of compassion for mammals, right? And we're mammals. And so this is just a really powerful way to access self-compassion. It's a way of signaling secure attachment for yourself. And so let's try a few of these gestures. And the first one that I'm going to offer you, I want you to, as you do these two, I want you to just really invite in sort of an attitude and a thought of extending kindness to yourself. So putting your palms together, pressed against one another, is one way to try this. And just feeling that with sort of kindness to yourself. And then you can also just cup one hand in the other. You can put a hand over your heart, or even two hands over the heart, noticing the difference there. Or you can take your fist and put it over your heart, and then your other hand over your fist. You can also just sort of gently stroke your chest back and forth, or even small circles, just comforting yourself. Or you can place one hand over your heart and another one on your belly. Or maybe two hands on your belly. You can also place a hand on your cheek, just gently, or really cradle your face in your hands. Or cross your arms and give yourself a gentle hug. Just gently stroke your arms. Or even just sort of holding your hands warmly in your lap. All right, I'm going to come back and sit down for this. You can try these out, right, and practice with them and see, is there one that really strikes you, right? And so I'm wondering, maybe just in the chat, was there one of those positions that you noticed being particularly available for you? Both hands over my heart. Yes, Lynn. Hand over heart. Yeah. Yes, I really find that comforting too. Hand over heart. Both hands on my face. Yes, Michelle. And I have to share with you, so when I did this the first time at the 2-day event that I went to, when I put my hands on my face, my mother died 10 years ago, and I hadn't seen her at that point for over 8 years. And I was just reminded of her. It just made me feel like I was with her for the first time in all that time. So it can be so soothing, so comforting. And that practice of putting my hands on my face became what I do when I have a sleepless night. So between going through menopause and having a son with type 1 diabetes, I've had a number of sleepless nights in the last few years. And so this has become a strategy that I use to help comfort myself to go back to sleep if I wake up. And I have to tell you, it happened last night. My son's his sugar went low. I woke up. I took care of him, made sure he was okay, and went back to bed, hands on face. I don't even know how long it took me to fall asleep, but it was pretty quick. And it's not about it being the fix-all, but these strategies can really help us. And so trying them out, right? And if this is challenging for you for any reason, one of the things that can be helpful is even just to take a warm bath, looking for other ways to be physically comforting yourself, right? Or even petting a dog or a cat, just your pet, to have some warmth in that way can be really helpful. So I'd like to build on this practice by moving us into another practice, which is known as a self-compassion break. So we'll do a little bit of soothing and supporting touch in this practice. And it's just a short guided practice, but I'll invite you to, again, just to either close your eyes or soften your gaze a few feet in front of you. And just think of a situation in your life that for any reason is just causing you some stress right now. It might be something work related, or maybe a difficult relationship, a health problem. Whatever it is, looking for something sort of in the mild to moderate range. And allowing yourself to just observe and feel your way into the problem. Seeing where you notice it in your body, whether there's any discomfort anywhere. And where do you notice it the most? And then saying to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. Just acknowledging to yourself that what you're experiencing hurts. And as you do this, recognizing that that is mindfulness. And now say to yourself, just slowly and clearly, suffering is part of life. I'm not alone. And there are plenty of people just like me who would respond to this situation just like I am. And that's what we mean by common humanity. And now putting your hand over your heart, or if you like, both hands over your heart, or wherever it feels supportive. Just feeling the warmth of your hands. And saying to yourself, may I be kind to myself. May I accept myself just as I am. May I care tenderly for myself in this moment. Or maybe even may I have the courage and strength to do what I need to do. And that is self-kindness. And if you're struggling in any way to find the right words, just imagine a dear friend or a loved one in this situation having the same type of problem as you. What would you say to that person? How would you treat them? Without giving advice, without needing to have the right answer, but just to be comforting. And if your friend were to hold just a few of your words in her mind, what would you want them to be? And is there some way that you could just offer that same message to yourself? And just slowly opening your eyes. And so those are the three parts of mindful self-compassion that we just moved through in that short practice. And we did it in a more formal way here, but you can also do this very informally in your day, in moments when you notice that you're suffering in some way, to just acknowledge that to yourself, connect to common humanity, and look for how can I extend kindness to myself in this moment. To give that to yourself. I want to share a little bit on caregiver fatigue, because I'm guessing that many of you are caregivers, and then I truly wonder, are there any of us who are not caregivers in some way, shape, or form for someone, for whether it be that it's part of our work roles or other relationships where we are caregivers in some way, shape, or form. Um, but I'm curious how many folks, well, I know a lot of people may be laying down or I'm gonna not make them get up. I'm gonna let them stay resting if that's what they're doing right now with their cameras off or they're not on screen, so that's totally fine. Um, but I want to share some ideas around caregiver fatigue or empathic distress because self-compassion can be so helpful in approaching these, right? And so we know that we're hardwired for empathy, right? We feel what other people are feeling generally when we observe them in pain. We can feel that pain ourselves, and that can make it really hard to be with, especially when there's something that we feel like we can't do anything about it. I was talking to a doctor the other day, and he was describing this and how frustrating it can be for him when, he knows, he's a cardiologist, he knows just what it is that patients need to do, and he's telling them what to do, and they're just not able to do it, and how that can just be so disheartening for him. And so one of the things that we can do in those situations is to offer ourselves self-compassion as a way to help increase our ability to show up with compassion in those difficult situations. So caregiver fatigue or empathic distress is not a weakness. It's really a sign of being human, right? We all have a limit to how much we can do and how much pain we can bear, right? And when it's too much, we start to shut down. And so oftentimes what we hear is that, well, we need to take a vacation or we need to somehow find a way to get away and unplug, which is all about self-care, and all of that is good, but there are some limitations to that, right? Sometimes those things have to happen outside of work, and they're not things that we can call on while we're on the job. And so compassion can actually, it's a different part of the brain that compassion versus empathy are two different parts of the brain. And so compassion can be an emotional resource that helps us to deal with that empathic distress that we feel. So what I would suggest to you is that, we need to have compassion for ourselves in order to refuel and in order to be able to show up for other people with compassion, right? And so caregivers need to be able to acknowledge their own suffering in order to address the suffering of others. And so when you can learn to, one of the great things that happens is when you can learn to calm yourself and soothe your own mind, the person that you're caring for will also feel calmer and soothed through their own empathic resonance. And so I want to share with you a final short practice for today, building on this concept, and it's called compassion with equanimity. And so when we're talking about equanimity here, we're referring to being able to stay calm when things are stressful and to be able to kind of have a balanced view, to not get caught up in the emotion of a situation, but to be able to see what's happening and sort of hold the space for it without getting caught up in negative emotions ourselves. And so let's try this one together. Finding a comfortable position and just, again, settling into your chair, maybe feeling your feet on the floor. And again, feel free to offer yourself soothing or supportive touch if that's helpful for you. And bringing to mind someone that you are caring for, someone who it might be that it's exhausting or frustrating for you right now. Ideally not your child, because that sometimes can be really complex for us, but someone else that you care for who's suffering. Just visualizing that person clearly in your mind and feeling the struggle in your body. And now just listening to these words and letting them gently roll through your mind. Everyone is on their own life journey. I'm not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it entirely within my power to make it go away, even though I wish I could. Aware of the stress that you're carrying in your body, just inhale fully and deeply, drawing in compassion for you and letting yourself be soothed with that deep inhale. And as you exhale, sending compassion out to the person associated with your discomfort. Breathing compassion in for you and out for the other person. One for me and one for you. Just scanning yourself, your internal landscape for any distress that might be coming up for you. And if you find that maybe you need a little extra compassion right now, giving your breath in that direction. Or if it's the other person, then maybe extending an extra breath of attention for them. And letting yourself float on an ocean of compassion, a limitless ocean that embraces all suffering. Just imagining that suffering drifting away. And listening to these words one more time. Everyone is on their own life journey. I'm not the cause of this person's suffering, nor is it entirely within my power to make it go away, even though I wish I could. Moments like these can be difficult to bear, yet I may still try to help if I can. And now letting go of the practice and just allowing yourself to be exactly as you are in this moment. Gently opening your eyes. And so I'm curious just to check in with all of you, particularly about the equanimity phrases. When we talked about everyone being in their own journey, how did that land for you, or what came up? Deborah says, felt good. Yeah, absolutely. Michelle says, thank you. This was great, but I have to run. Excited to start practicing this. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I find one of my caregiving relationships is with my father. He's 90 years old, and he has dementia, and it can be really tough seeing him struggle. And I feel like this reminder, these equanimity phrases, can be so powerful for helping me, and actually just even remembering that if I can take care of myself in the moment and have compassion for what I'm going through, that he will also feel better. And so those two things have been really useful for me, and I hope that you find them to be useful too. We're all on this journey together, and we hope that you found this to be really helpful today. Ashley, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. I want to just acknowledge Mary's comment, because she typed in and said that this was really an eye-opening practice for her. She tends to be a fixer and feels like a failure if she can't solve all the problems for someone. And Mary, I know you're not alone. So, so hopefully these practices are supportive for you and for all of you. And speaking of that, the practices that Shanaz led us through today were many. The first was the soft landing, the, breathing in and just sort of on the exhale. Then we did a journaling exercise of how would I treat a friend, and then acknowledging and recognizing how we treat ourselves. She took us through a number of supportive and soothing touch exercises, and then the self-compassion break. We meditated a bit, recognizing that this difficult moment is difficult and it's painful, and everyone feels difficult, painful moments. We tapped into common humanity, and then just some mindfulness about, what is it that I might need right now. And then this final practice, beautiful practice, compassion with equanimity, and these phrases, acknowledging that we're not in control of fixing everything for everyone else, and people are on their own unique life journeys. So those were each of the practices, and you're going to get a little digital toolkit follow-up that reminds you of what these are so that you can practice them on your own. And maybe in just the moment that's left, because I want to be mindful of time, we could type into the chat bar, which practices did you feel were most supportive or helpful? And we'll leave the practices on the screen. Just curious how you feel about what felt meaningful for you today out of these practices. Maybe you could type into the chat bar. Angela said she loved, I think it was the soft landing, the practice. Mm. Anybody else have one particular that landed on them? I know I really was struck with the last practice, compassion with equanimity, and found it very, very helpful. Laura also loved the soft landing and the soothing and supportive touch, and that final practice. Deborah says, how would she treat a friend? That was a really helpful one, as it was for Lynn. And Mary says, the journaling exercise. At 51 years old, I just learned that I treat my friends totally different than I treat myself. And yes, Mary, you made a beautiful comment, I think, in the chat bar during that practice, recognizing that we didn't get to acknowledge that chat bar comment that you made. So thank you all. Thank you all for sharing. So beautifully. Let's all take a collective deep inhale and a deep exhale, and maybe come into gallery view and just wave a goodbye. Shanaz and I are deeply grateful to be here today. And Shanaz, I don't know if you want to advance to the final slide, just to show contact information. But thanks to Athena and to Lynn for organizing all of this. It was an honor to be with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone. Great to be here with all of you.